Joan. Good morning. Good morning. And as others join us, Rock's going to help me pay attention to the waiting room and let people in. But it is a couple of minutes after 10, so let's go ahead and get started. I would just like to announce that today happens to be International Migrants Day.
Oh,
How
wow.
appropriate. How appropriate for our last immigration spotlight of the year. And we have some marvelous guest speakers that I'm anxious to get to. But first of all, I think Rox has an opening prayer for us.
You're muted, Rox.
We go. Here we are in between the feast day of Our Lady of Guadalupe and coming up onto Christmas. So this prayer is directed to Mary's big heart. Prayer for those who migrate. The weariness of the journey to Bethlehem, to Egypt, back to Nazareth. She knew the weariness, the fear, the longing for home, the need to continue moving, the longing for journey's end, the longing for at least a home. To Mary, we entrust the mothers, the fathers, the children who today are holy families, migrating in hope, in fear, in longing for peace, for some security, for something like a home. May they find their journey's end as we open ourselves to their stories, their need, their spirits. We ask for mercy for all migrants and for our communities who are challenged to welcome them, to give them hope for a new life. And the church says, Amen.
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 Just a note, Bob cannot be with us this morning. He's doing a desert walk with his son. He's taking food and water on the desert. I think they're doing it now every Friday.
Wow. Too bad. I was hoping Bob could be with us to hear our speakers.
Well, that's why I'm glad we're recording it.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure he'll know how to get on, but we can talk to him.
We'll figure that out. Yes, yes. And I haven't asked our speakers, do we have your approval to record your presentation?
Oh, yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, right, Alyssa? Yeah.
Okay, great, great. Okay, well, as I said, today is International Migrants Day. And I just came off a webinar that was hosted by some friends and former colleagues of mine, some colleagues, not current colleagues of Rosa at the UN in recognition of international migrants. And of the 4 speakers, 2 of them were former Loretto volunteers who were interns with me in our UN office when I was there, Teresa Blumenstein and Cecily Kern. And here we are. I mean, I've been gone from that position for 4 years now, and the 2 of them are still there, still doing the work, still, as far as I'm concerned, still representing Loretto in this wonderful work. Excuse me, I just got a text message.
I'll do that, Sally.
From Libby. Okay, good, thank you. So I was really so proud of seeing these 2, and this thing was recorded, and when they send the recording out, I'm going to send it out to all of you. I was so happy that our president, Barbara, was also on this webinar, and I sent her a little note in the chat saying, I'm so glad you're getting to see these 2 marvelous women who continue to do really wonderful work and continue to be Loretto's representatives there in the global work. Teresa was the moderator, and I jotted down a couple of things she said that I wanted to share with you, and then I'm going to introduce our guests. Teresa talked about the fact that the phrase used at the UN is people on the move. And when you count all the people who are not living in the country where they were born, as well as those people who are internally displaced in the country where they were born, there are a total of 338 people on the move globally, 338 million people on the move. And that represents over 4% of the world's population. So this is a huge number of people who, as Teresa described them, are rights holders who do not relinquish their dignity nor their human rights when they cross an international border. And that is a strong value that motivates the work that we do in the Latin America Caribbean Committee. So having said that, I just want to tell you how pleased I am and grateful I am to the two speakers who have joined us this morning from an organization that we do not have a long-standing history with, but we're establishing a wonderful relationship with an organization in Pennsylvania called Rosa told me how to pronounce this. Aldea.
Aldea, La Aldea.
Aldea PJC, People's Justice Center, located in Pennsylvania, where one of the 3 family detention centers in the United States is located. And they do advocacy work and legal support work for the families that are detained in Berk's Family Detention Center. So I'm going to give you an introduction of each of them, and then I'm going to turn the program over. First of all, we have with us Adriana Zambrano, who is the program's coordinator at Aldea. Adriana is an immigrant herself from Colombia, an experience, she says, that inspired her to pursue a career in the support and advancement of immigrants like herself and her family. She volunteered her time as a college student in Miami with Catholic Charities and with the International Rescue Committee. And she then moved on to an immigration defense paralegal position for 5 years. As a law student, she pursued an internship with CARA, the Legal Defense Project established in Dilley, Texas, we know of that, to represent the thousands of asylum-seeking families that are detained there. And then she worked with the Sex Workers Project at the Urban Justice Center in New York. After working with immigrants in different situations, she pursued work that would allow her to make a difference in the lives of the most vulnerable of them, families with children, trafficking victims, and detained populations, leading her to become a long-term legal volunteer with Aldea. And then most recently, she assumed the position to coordinate Aldea's detention, litigation, and community programs. We're so happy to have Adriana with us.
Thank you for having me.
Also joining us, and Adriana and I have had a number of communications in the past few weeks, but also joining us is someone I've not met before this morning, Alyssa Kane, who is a former AmeriCorps volunteer, and she chose to pursue her law degree in order to advocate for low-income people and others whose voices would otherwise go unheard. Sounds like Loretto, doesn't it? Her co-ops and clinic experiences throughout law school allowed her to develop her skills working with low-income immigrant populations in diverse situations, from recently arrived families and children to individuals in detention who have not seen their families for months or years. Teaching English as a second language and later working with immigrants in the business context impressed upon her the unique difficulties experienced by immigrants, and especially non-native English speakers. But witnessing firsthand the social isolation of adults in immigration detention, the confusion and fear of children separated from their parents, and the lingering effects of government custody on already traumatized families, she was inspired to seek work that would assist people in detention to attain critically needed resources and support to reunite with their families and live freely in the United States. She is thrilled to be the managing attorney at Aldea PJC, where the mission is always to advocate for more just treatment and outcomes for detained immigrants, their families, and their communities. So with that, Adriana and Alyssa, you have the floor.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Sally, and thank you so much to everyone in the Loretto community that's opening up the space for us to talk a little bit about what our organization does. Now, I'm wondering, can I share my screen here? Yes, I think I can. We prepared a little presentation for you. Can you see our presentation? Fantastic. Okay. So we're just going to talk a little bit about who we are and how we are responding to challenges in the Trump era and preparing for a new administration. This is our staff and our co-founders, Bridget Cambria and Jackie Klein. And these are our projects. So basically, Aldea started in 2016 officially, but even a little bit before that, in 2014, a group of local attorneys received a call from a family in the Berks County Family Detention Center, and they identified a huge need for representation for these vulnerable families. And in order to, this was in 2014, and in order to better address that need and better serve this population, Aldea was created. And ever since then, Aldea has expanded not only to our Berks Family Detention Project, but also an adult detention project that covers York County Prison and other local detention facilities. And we have also expanded our services to the community, to vulnerable persons in the community, either persons who have already survived detention or persons who are in domestic violence situations, trafficking situations, victims of crimes, etc. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about Trump's attacks on families, on refugee families. One of the things that we've been paying a lot of attention to and working with is the Remain in Mexico policy. Basically, what this means is that instead of allowing asylum seekers to come into the United States and have their cases processed here, what's happening is that they are forcing asylum seekers to return to Mexico, which is exposing them to very dangerous conditions in border cities for months. This has led to thousands of people living in makeshift refugee camps in border cities. And this has created a terrible situation, not only for them who are living in this precarious situation, but for their legal cases as well. It has been found that less than 1% of migrants have succeeded in overcoming this policy. And effectively that eviscerates asylum law protections. So immigration court is pretty tough as it is. It's even tougher. The immigration courts in the border are the ones with the lowest grant rate. And on top of that, just the logistics of having to prepare a case from a refugee camp on the other side of the border. It's just impossible to find legal counsel. It's impossible to find even, like a way to print your evidence and prepare your case, to prepare your declarations and stuff like that. It's just, it's a mess. One of the cases that we worked on was the case of Maddie, who is a 7-year-old girl who was subject to MPP, to the Migrant Protection Protocols, to the Remain in Mexico policy. She and her father, they obviously lost their case. And for some reason, I don't know why they were doing this, when they lost their case, instead of taking them back to Guatemala, where they were from, they were brought all the way here to Berks. And that was a big mistake because they found us. And we filed about 5 lawsuits to stop their deportation. We reversed the negative result of their asylum case. And even though they spent 7 months detained, we prevented their separation, because one of the things that they faced while they were detained was they told the dad, well, if you want, we can release your child, but not you. And that was pretty devastating to them, but we prevented that from happening. And also we reunited the family. We reunited Maddie and her dad with the rest of her family that was waiting for her here in the United States. So that was a case that we worked really hard on and that had a good outcome. And this is the family. This is Maddie and her father and her mother and her little brother, released and in the community. Another notorious attack on families by the Trump administration has been, of course, family separation. Family separation, the zero tolerance policy consists on when people crossed the border, they were prosecuting them, something that they didn't used to do, or they didn't used to do as frequently. And in order to prosecute the adult, they would have to take away the child from them, but they didn't really have any plan for reunification or for how, what would happen after the prosecution. They transferred the children to be detained in other agencies thousands of miles away. We had cases of parents who were detained in detention facilities or prisons along the border, and the kids were taken over to Michigan, to New York, to places really far away, and where the parents had no idea where they were. Oops. And it was very interesting when this was when this started happening. A lot of people think that the family separation policy started in 2018, but in reality, the pilot started happening in 2017. And that's when we first started receiving calls from people on the border saying like, hey, we're noticing that this is happening. So we were one of the first legal organizations to file a lawsuit based on sorry, my computer is trying to restart and I'm trying to get it not to do that at this moment. We were among the first to use immigration courts to secure bonds to reunite these families. So for example, one time we fled over to El Paso to do a bond proceeding there, and we had a family released. And another occasion we fled all the way to Buffalo. We actually drove there. We went to Buffalo where they had another mother detained there who was separated from her 3 children. And we were among the first also who filed a lawsuit based on the child's right to be reunified with their parents. This lawsuit became, I don't know if you have heard of Miss L. The Miss L litigation was eventually the case that the ACLU used in order to reunite all these families. But this case is really a combination of several cases, including the case that we filed that was based on the child's right to be reunified with the parents. So that was really important. And some of these early cases that we worked on were featured in the media. For example, here we have Blanca when she was still detained in El Paso. Her story was featured in the Houston Chronicle. And we have Silvana, whose story was, Silvana was the mom in Buffalo, and her story was featured in the Washington Post. And these other two are 2 other cases of families that were reunited because of our work and our efforts. And I think one of the accomplishments of Aldea is not only the success stories that we have on the individual cases, but also in our ability to engage with other human rights organizations, with international human rights organizations like Amnesty International, and other organizations like Kids in Need of Defense. We have formed coalitions with Human Rights First, with the Young Center, with other national organizations whose focus is to defend and protect the dignity of immigrants, especially vulnerable immigrants like children. The beautiful face that we're featuring here on this slide is the face of Angel. He is one kid that was detained for over 1.5 years in the Berks County Detention Center. And I just love this picture because it's everything that he is. He's such a playful and beautiful kid. And he actually just received his green card, his residency, after having been detained for such a long time. And I think the point that I'm trying to make here is that a lot of the time, what the other side will say is that, you know, they did something illegal, or that they need to be detained because they don't have credible asylum claims or something like that. But like, look at this kid. This kid actually did have a claim. His mother is an asylum seeker, and he had a path towards legalization. He had a path towards a green card, and he got his green card. So why detain kids? Why detain people who have a viable claim for immigration relief? So I think one of the successful things that we have done in Aldea is to form coalitions with other organizations in order to vindicate the rights that these people have, because they do have them, and a lot of the time they do have very valid claims. And I'll turn it over to Alyssa to talk a little bit more about the local coalitions that we have formed and about other attacks on the asylum system and on asylum seekers that we've been working on. Alyssa?
Thank you, Adriana. So I joined Aldea a little bit later than Adriana. I was not involved with the organization until 2018. 2019 was when I actually started as an attorney with the organization representing adults in immigration detention in Pennsylvania. And of course, we had the Berk's residential, the Universal Representation Project, offering free legal representation to all families at the Berk's Family, excuse me, residential center. But we hadn't really piloted that program anywhere else. And accessing people in detention in Pennsylvania who are mostly detained in county jails is very difficult. So we quickly learned that there are many, many other organizations who are doing this kind of work, providing visitation projects, providing bond assistance to people in Pennsylvania in detention, and they wanted to help us. And so we were able to form coalitions with local religious and community organizations to help get people bond, immigration bond, which has been an enormous relief and help to people who would not otherwise be able to pay the exorbitant amounts that immigration courts put for bond. It can be, for example, if you have a pending immigration claim and you're detained with no criminal history, you might pay a bond between $3,000 and $10,000. And most people simply can't afford that. Most people just don't have that in their pockets, especially when they're currently in prison and having trouble accessing their own communities. So that has been a huge relief. We've also partnered with prison visitation projects, local religious organizations that help us get word of especially vulnerable clients in immigration detention. And we have partnered with community organizations to help people get local resources like housing. And we are working on building out that capacity in our organization right now so that we can offer that kind of assistance more often, referrals for people who need local medical care, local housing, local transportation. And we have a huge team of volunteers as well in the local community that provide translation support, interpretation support, and transportation often is a huge need for people when they're leaving detention, when they are trying to get from, local county jail A in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, to New York, Miami, Nevada. They end up all over because many of these people come from the border. They're taken at the border and shipped to a detention center in Pennsylvania in a county jail. And a lot of that is this is actually more common. Oh, I don't have control of the slide, Adriana. I might have to tell you when to change them. Yeah, that's okay. So immigration detention is much more common now because of the attacks on asylum seekers that have taken place under the Trump administration. And those have come in the form of many regulatory changes. Regulatory changes have made it more difficult for people to actually get asylum. And when you're less likely to get asylum, when you don't get asylum, you're more likely to stay in detention and you're more likely to be detained in the first place. And our local organizing and local coalition building has seen a lot of impetus because people know about these changes. They know that the immigration system is becoming much more hostile to people trying to get to the United States to seek protection, and they don't like it and they want to help. In Pennsylvania, we have a huge number of religious and community organizations who are very interested in helping immigrants live and work safely in the community and contribute to their community. And it's hard for people to keep track of all of the changes, and we could be talking about all of the changes that the Trump administration has made to immigration policy for hours. There are entire organizations devoting like huge numbers of resources just to keeping track of the changes to the immigration policies so that the rest of us can keep up. But for now, I want to highlight the refugee cap, first of all, which is different from asylum. Asylum is a process that you can seek once you're inside the United States. If anyone doesn't know this, refugee status is something that you can seek outside the United States from a country where you are in danger of being persecuted. And the United States has certain obligations under international treaties to accept some refugees, but at the moment, the proposed cap that Trump has put forward for 2021 is the lowest in US history. It's only 15,000 people compared to the numbers are up there, the Obama administration caps, which by the way, we're still fairly low. We're an average of 67,100 admissions per year. And that's a huge burden on our international neighbors. It's who have to accept more refugees because we are not accepting them. It's a huge, and it causes these, part of what's causing these crises at borders all over the world, not just at our own border, but also at the US border, where people from all over the world, not just South America and Central America, come to try to present themselves to seek asylum. People from Africa, people from Asia end up at the southern border of the United States seeking asylum, trying to enter to seek asylum because they cannot access protection in the US or any other country from inside their own country. They have to travel. And I also wanted to highlight, some of the ways that the Trump administration has made it more difficult to seek asylum are just about making it more expensive and more timely to get any kind of legal status. So we're not changing the law, right? Because the law is very hard to change without congressional support. But instead, we can just make every step more difficult for the people who are seeking protection, for the people who are seeking legal status, and also for their representatives who have to put more time and effort into, and organizations like ours who have to put more time and effort into every single case in order to deal with all of these changes. And finally, I wanted to talk about the third country transit ban, which many of you have probably heard of. People have called it the asylum ban 2.0, maybe even the asylum ban 3.0 at this point. And unfortunately, it may actually come into effect again. But it was in effect before a federal court ruled it unlawful for a couple of months. During that time, people who entered the United States, and this was in between July of 2019 and January of, March, I believe, of this year, people who entered the United States during that time through the southern border without having sought asylum in Mexico, essentially, or another country en route to the United States, were simply ineligible for asylum. And if you're ineligible for asylum, that means that you will not be able to get legal status here unless you have some other alternative method, which most of these people don't. The idea that people would not be able, the idea that people would be able to seek protection in Mexico or another Central or South American country en route to the United States when they are fleeing from countries in Africa or countries in South America or in Central America is patently ridiculous. And most international observers agree that these countries are not, in fact, safe third countries in which people should be expected to seek asylum en route to the United States. But it may, in fact, go into effect again unless something is done to stop it, because the administration has finalized a new rule implementing it again just recently. And we can go to the next slide. So one of the reasons, the third country transit ban is one of the main reasons that the families that are at Berks now who have been detained for months are still detained. And that's because they were subjected to the safe third country transit ban. They entered the United States via the southern border and did not seek asylum in Mexico first. And that means that they were not even allowed to start the process of applying for asylum, despite the fact that these are parents with minor children, toddlers mostly. And this is the same reason that the families at Dilley are not able to seek asylum right now. These families were all denied even the most basic process in order to seek protection in the United States. And so we have been fighting for that to change for the entire time that they have been detained, because they should receive a process. The rule was already deemed unlawful by a federal court when after it was first applied. But the fact that they entered during that period, during that window when it was in effect, essentially means that they get no process. There is no recourse for them under the law to challenge their specific proceedings. So we have filed many lawsuits about that, and gotten many stays of removal from many courts. But ultimately, the bottom line for these families is that the law is not offering them the help and the protection that they require. So we have collaborated with lots of other organizations, especially the two other organizations who represent family detention centers, or families in detention at the detention centers, Dili, the Dili Pro Bono Project and Raices. We have also collaborated. So many people have come out in support of this project, in support of safety for these 28 families who are remaining in family detention right now. All of them have been detained the entire length of the pandemic, essentially, in the United States, placing them and their children in even more danger. And so we are kind of trying to rally everyone to get them released as soon as possible, and to get them a pathway towards an asylum process in the United States where they can live with their families. All of them have family members in the United States that they could go and live with right now if they were released from detention. And unfortunately, the government has been doing the exact opposite of that. They have been pushing for their deportation for months. So we are working with lots of people to get congressional attention on this, to get USCIS and other government agencies to pay attention to this and realize how extremely unfair and unjust the process has been for these families specifically. And the families are still detained right now. As far as we know, they are not scheduled to be deported right now, but that could change honestly at any moment. So we are always working for these families to try to make sure that they don't get sent back to harm in their countries. And I think we can go to the next slide. Oh, I also did want to mention on the last slide, we've had some very good responses from Pennsylvania representatives on behalf of these children. Our efforts have been drawing attention to this case, to these cases, and people in Congress, in local Congress and in federal Congress, are paying attention. And we are very hopeful that in the new year and the new administration, this can spur action to make sure that this kind of thing does not happen again to more families in detention. Okay. So some of the attacks on protection and on immigration in general have come in the form of expanded detention. And this kind of goes hand in hand with the separated families, the policy of separation, of family separation, and the policies keeping people from applying for protection in the United States. The goal of the Trump administration has been always to deter migration by instituting punitive practices, by punishing people essentially for coming to the United States to seek protection. So in 2018, ICE made 5 times more immigration arrests at workplaces than it did in 2017, drastically expanded arrests in state courthouses, and this kind of thing causes so much disruption and trauma to the lives of these people, their families, their communities. It causes disruption to all of the court processes. These people are being arrested on their way into formerly safe places, right? They are in fact showing up at court, or trying to show up at court, when they are arrested for simple crimes like, you get a parking ticket, you get stopped for a traffic violation, and you try to go to court to deal with that issue the way that you're supposed to, but ICE grabs you on your way in, and you end up in a jail or a prison without ever being able to get rid of that violation, that initial that initial crime. And of course, that this also results in family separation. Almost all of the time when people are taken in raids, they are separated from families, they are separated from their communities, they are putting strain on their workplaces, they are putting strain on their children and their partners. And I really think the toll that this causes to communities can't be understated, and I'm really hopeful that we can discuss these kinds of enforcement in the new administration. And all of this is happening now because the Trump administration has basically gotten rid of enforcement priorities. So just like any other police force, ICE has the ability to exercise discretion and decide who it's going to detain and when. And under previous administrations, whatever we might think of those policies, at least there was some sense making in setting out priorities. So people who have criminal histories were higher priority than people who did not have criminal histories, and that is simply no longer the case. So one of our featured cases, one of our Aldea clients, we've anonymized the names for their privacy, but Chris was 20 years old when he was taken in a workplace raid where he was working at a restaurant. He was taken from his family members who are also here in the United States. He was undocumented because the first time he tried to seek protection in the United States as a gay man from Honduras, he was actually deported essentially with no process. So when he came back, because he was still in danger, he managed to make it to his family members and was living here safely in the United States, was working, had no criminal history whatsoever, contributing to his family and his community. And he was taken in a workplace raid, and he ended up at the York County Prison at the age of 20 years old, and he spent 2 birthdays there. He celebrated his 21st and 22nd birthday at the York County Prison in Pennsylvania before we took his case and managed to get his protection determination reversed on appeal. We took it all the way up to the Third Circuit, which determined that he actually had in fact experienced persecution in Honduras in the past, and that he should get a new hearing for protection because he really does deserve it. Another one of our featured cases, is a young woman by the name of Hazel. She is a Nicaraguan political activist who entered the United States via a port of entry. So one of the bridges at the border, just the way that you're supposed to, just the way that they tell you is the legal way to enter the United States. She went to the bridge and asked for asylum, and she was also sent at the age of 19 to the York County Prison, where she spent over a year after she was initially denied protection as well. And we took her case to the Third Circuit and won that case as well. They also determined that she had experienced persecution in the past and deserved the chance to seek asylum here in the United States. Both of their cases are still pending, but we're very hopeful that they will ultimately succeed in getting permanent protection here in the United States. But the fact that these young people with no criminal record whatsoever, who were no threat to the United States, who were just here seeking protection, the fact that they were imprisoned for over a year is just kind of spotlights how absurd the lack of enforcement priorities, how absurd the determinations under the Trump administration have been. They should have been paroled into the United States when they tried to enter in the first place. They should never have been detained. And it was honestly a huge waste of our resources for them to end up in prison at all. And we can go to the next slide. So there has been a lot of media highlights on ICE's enforcement. And again, we just wanted to spotlight some articles and some call attention to some of the local cases in Pennsylvania. But there are similar cases across the United States. People being taken, separated from their families, sent to prison where they are imprisoned at taxpayer expense solely for not having an immigration status, even when it's definitely not their fault and it's definitely our system's fault for not offering them a way to get a legal status in the first place. And we can go to the next slide, I think. So one of the more complicated ways that the Trump administration has changed the immigration system involves, well, first we have the immigration, like every step of the process gets more expensive and more difficult and takes longer. So people spend more time detained, they spend more time struggling to meet ends meet, relying more on their families and communities, and then of course being taken from their families and communities and sent to prisons and detention. But one of the more complicated ways that the Trump administration has done these things is that he has used administrative process and due process to actually make it more difficult for people to seek protection. So by denying people the ability to argue their immigration eligibility in court, in immigration court, he has actually restricted, and then he and his administration have actually restricted eligibility for huge swaths of people, especially people who come from Central America, claiming fear of gang violence, fear of domestic violence, and fear based on their family relationships. So one of the cases that we took, this was actually a case that we took in partnership with Human Rights First, who had identified this young man who was detained at the York County Prison. Again, he was 18 at the time. His mother was being targeted by gangs because she had refused the advances of a gang member. And in retaliation for her refusal, this gang had actually already killed 2 of his younger brothers and were threatening to kill him as well. So he and his mother fled to the United States. And when he ended up at the York County Prison at the age of 18, he went before a judge, and at the time, and still right now, a specific ruling by the Attorney General, who at the time was Jeff Sessions, made it so that family membership cannot be used as a justification for applying for asylum. Essentially, there's several good reasons for applying for asylum, and being targeted because of your family membership is just no longer one of them. So he was simply denied asylum. Luckily, through our partnership with Human Rights First, we were able to get him out of that prison and into the community where he's living now and waiting for his appeal. However, his appeal is taking a very, very, very long time because everything in the immigration process is taking a very long time right now. And the administration just has no incentive to expedite or process his case in a timely fashion because they know that we're going to argue that he should be able to get protection on the basis of his family membership. So it's been over a year, I think a year and a half now, that he has just been kind of in this immigration limbo. He was denied asylum, he's appealed, and his appeal is just sitting, waiting to be processed. And in the meantime, he has no status and no way to get work authorization. And one of the other cases that the Attorney General, specifically Attorney General Sessions, one of the other rulings he made affects gang violence and gender-based violence claims. So one of our clients, another client from the York County Prison, was a young woman. She was 19 when we met her. She had undergone severe sexual and gender-based violence in her country. She had her first baby when she was 13 years old, and her second when she was 15 years old. She finally managed to escape her abuser and make it to the United States, where she was sent to a prison, imprisoned for months and forced to do her entire case behind bars, including, give testimony about her experiences, which were extremely traumatic, without any access to mental health resources, without any access to a doctor, even who spoke her native language. And she was denied asylum because domestic violence and gang violence and gender-based violence are simply not good reasons to seek asylum in the United States, according to a very specific rule by the Attorney General. And the fact that our asylum laws allow this is very unfortunate, and it's one of the things that we hope to advocate for to change. And I'm sorry, I just saw the comment. I think we're actually going to be wrapping up fairly soon. We have one. This is our last substantive slide. But yeah, I just wanted to mention very quickly that one of the other ways in which the asylum process or the immigration laws are being used against asylum seekers has to do with what's called expedited removal. And it's applied, it was what caused the case that I talked about earlier, the young man from Honduras, the gay man who spent over a year in detention. When he first came to the United States, he was subjected to a process called expedited removal. And actually almost all of these people were subjected to a process called expedited removal, wherein one asylum officer and one immigration judge get final say over whether or not you get to seek protection at all, whether or not you even get to apply for asylum. And if that one asylum officer is poorly trained or is simply biased, and that one immigration judge is poorly trained or simply biased, you will just immediately get deported, essentially with no protections. And that's what happened to the families who are detained right now at Berks and Dilly, the 28 families. They were denied that initial fear screening by an asylum officer and an immigration judge because of the transit ban, right? They were not allowed to seek asylum because of the transit ban, and that made it much more difficult for them to prove that they're eligible for any kind of protection at all. And because of this expedited removal process that they are in, which limits judicial review to only exactly those two individuals, right? The asylum officer and the immigration judge, they simply are not entitled to a court deciding whether or not their process was fair, even if their process was definitely unfair. And most of the judges who these cases have gone before have said that process was definitely unfair and they should get a new one. They can't order a new one. It's simply against the law for them to do that. So again, moving forward into the new year, the new administration, we hope to continue to advocate on these issues, and we hope to ultimately make substantive changes to the law and to the way that we approach immigration enforcement and immigration, legalization status for people who are seeking protection, status for people who just want to live here and contribute to their families and their communities. So our last slide, I think, is just how can you help? So volunteer, take direct action. And I think Adriana was gonna say something about this.
Yes, thank you. And unfortunately, right now the phone is ringing and the dog wants to participate in this webinar. So I'm sorry for all the background noise. But what are after this presentation, after really talking about like all the horrible things that are happening and how we're responding as like one tiny little organization in PA, what can people do? And I think exactly what the Loretto community and what you guys are doing and giving us the space to talk about this and to educate ourselves and to have these important conversations, I think that is exactly it. That is on point. To not believe the hype and to not believe everything that is being said on television or in the news or in media, but actually talking to the advocates that are doing this work on the ground. I think that's extremely important. Another thing that we can do is volunteer. If you have language skills, if you speak Spanish or any other language, please reach out to us. And we often receive calls of people who speak other languages and we're just like, okay, how are we going to communicate with them? And using a language line and interpreted by phone tends to be really expensive. So if you have language skills that you can volunteer, we're very happy to receive them. If you have legal skills, like either like paralegal skills, or if you know attorneys who are retired and maybe want to do some side work, that would be awesome too. In terms of the Berks County Residential Center, one of the things that we advocate for, or that we would like to see happen, is for it to not even exist anymore. And in order to do that, one of the things that we can do is we can take direct action. We can call Governor Wolf, who can at any time issue an emergency removal order to shut down the facility. Two other targets for the same are the PADHS Secretary Miller and the Lieutenant Governor Fetterman. Their phone numbers are posted on the slide. And you can also write to the office of the governor and ask that this facility be shut down completely. Another thing that we invite people to do is to donate. We are funded almost entirely by individual donations and by a few grants. And also becoming a digital ambassador. We are starting to test kind of this program in which people who are interested in getting our organization out there and like the work that we do to kind of like do these presentations and using your voice and your networks to grow a support base. And another thing that people can do is to write a letter to the editor for the local paper, just talking about these issues, and again, engaging the community and educating the community. And at this time, I think we have talked quite a bit. I'm going to stop sharing the slides and ask if there are any questions that we can answer for people.
First of all, I want to say thank you so much, both to you, Adriana, and to Alyssa. This was very informative, very helpful, very familiar, as a matter of fact, to what we hear from other speakers, from other experiences that we have had. We have a pretty strong presence on the border, the southern border. And I am going to open it up to questions. We have a couple more things that we want to cover. So we might end up going a little past the hour, I'm not sure, but I have to tell you all that I need to leave now to get ready for another call that's happening at 10 o'clock. And I'm going to turn it over to Rox, maybe. Rox, I have made you a co-host, okay? And wonderful to see you all. Thank you very much. And we'll see you soon. Oh, one thing I did want to say though, however, is that Loretto, the LACC, has recently made a contribution to this organization. Shannon and Karen in Kentucky have sent a check for $800, which is either on its way or perhaps you've already received it. So we wanted to contribute financially to the work that you do, because it's work that we're all doing. So thank you again so much. Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much for your generosity.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Love you all.
Sally.
Thank
Good
you.
luck.
So
Thank
nice
you,
meeting
Sally.
Thank you.
Okay, and we have a few minutes for questions. Did someone want to jump in and ask Adriana or Lisa a question? Rosa.
Well, I think first of all, I just want to thank you both for that wonderful presentation. I think it's so, yeah, let's do a cheer for them. I think it's so important, and it's so much in line with the work that we do. And one of the things we want to do is extend this type of messaging advocacy to the full membership. And I know it's not fully represented here today, but for sure, this is a tool, and I hope that we can, we've recorded it. It's a tool that we can use to raise awareness with our other members. So thank you so much. This certainly has a ripple effect, and it's all about the work that we're doing as the Latin American and Caribbean Committee within the Loretto community. And one of the things we've also done is support this issue of separated families. Just recently, we wrote a letter to the Biden and Harris elect committee. Did you see that? Basically,
I think we endorsed it.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, we had over 900 endorsements, and 300 of those also were congregations, organizations, institutions that supported this reunification of families, and then also the immediate establishment of a task force. So it's part of our full effort, and we're so glad that you endorsed that, and we're so glad that we count on you on partners. I did want to ask a question about the advocacy and the points that you mentioned, Adriana, about what you can do. And this digital ambassadors sounds really great. If you can elaborate a bit more on that, because I think that everything is online now, right? So how do we do it? Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think you're doing it right now. And I think it's something also new for us and something that we are learning about as well. But I think, like making a space like this for us uh, so that we can digitally meet and have these conversations. I think that's part of being a digital ambassador. And part of it also is helping us fundraise. I think, especially now towards the end of the year, if any of you guys wanted to become a digital ambassador for fundraising for us, we could prepare you. We could, just like have like a mini session with you to kind of like talk about more specifically what you can do depending on like what your networks are, depending what uh, kind of access you have in the community, but also helping us spread the word with the campaigns that we've been working on. For example, the campaign for safety for the 28 is one campaign where we got a lot of attention precisely because of those digital ambassadors. We have just like really just like friends in the community that will pick up anything that we are doing and just like amplify it in social media. And like I said, that can be a fundraiser, that can be a specific campaign, advocacy campaign, or that can be anything. So I think that's more or less what a digital ambassador would mean. And like I said, we're learning more about that kind of relationship ourselves as well.
You know what I'm thinking, and I'm wondering, thank you both very much, but as a as the Loretto community, we are connected with congregations, LCWR, all over the US. And maybe if there's a way that we could figure out, I know that we know there's social justice person, and just to, especially in the East, that's where, I mean, we're all over the country, but I know there are congregations in Philadelphia that are part of it, and New York. Good Lord, so maybe that's something we could do as LACC, work on that.
I see your wheels turning. And just to add, Mary Jane, we have all the contacts from those 900
Letter,
who
yeah.
endorsed this letter, and we can work with you to send out a message like year-end funding, year-end support, any funds left, send to La Aldea. We can do that.
And to spread the word of that campaign, safety for 28 families. That's very concrete. And to see those pictures of those little kids still. So
One of the things, oh, sorry, go ahead, Mary Jean.
no, I was just going to say it was Rox who brought a film to us from people on the, where you had it was a candlelight or drive by the Berk's Detention Center. So anyway, and we know those people. So
Yes, that was like it was a caravan action.
yeah, a caravan.
Yeah, that was a really creative action that some of the people in the Shutdown Berks Coalition put together, and that was really cool. Another thing that I was thinking about and that I mentioned to Alyssa is, for example, in the past couple of days, we achieved a release of one of the families from the Berks County Residential Center. And what ICE did was they just dropped her off at a bus station in the middle of a snowstorm, knowing very well that the bus could not leave, and they just dumped her there. So we just like raced to figure out if we knew anyone in Harrisburg who could just go and give her some food, give her some cash, or give her some, like, whatever it is that she needed.
Oh.
And luckily we found someone, we found a volunteer, but knowing that you guys have such great connections and all over the country, it gives us kind of like a first stop before we just like go crazy on Facebook and social media, just saying help, please, that we can go to you, knowing that you guys have this kind of network for support. And that's really priceless.
I was going to ask, and this is going to be a long answer, but it maybe briefly, all these things that Trump did, can they be undone in a timely manner in the next 4 years?
Well, one of the kind of good and bad things about the immigration system that we have right now is that it's basically entirely controlled by the executive, like the administrative executive branch. So one of the easiest things that Biden can do is simply say, I'm not going to enforce those rules, right? He, as the head as the boss of DHS, right, can tell DHS, just don't enforce those policies anymore. Don't enforce those rules anymore, and the rules won't be enforced. Don't conduct deportations in line with these priorities, create new priorities. And unfortunately, one of the things that made it so easy for the Trump administration to make all of these changes without any congressional approval or oversight, and without any judicial oversight, means that it will be just as easy for Biden to take the rules back and change them back. So we have, we've been working with other organizations to try to get a foot in the door to express our opinions on how these policy changes should go, and what priority they should take. And the other things that they can do definitely on an easy, like quick level, are the kinds of like executive actions like reinstituting DACA, expanding DACA, and instituting TPS, temporary protected status, for more countries, and to allow more people to seek temporary protection in the United States while they pursue other claims for protection, so that they are not in this like immigration limbo that keeps people from working legally and keeps them at risk of detention. But long term, what we really need is congressional action and immigration reform, true immigration reform in the law that makes it so that future presidents can't abuse the executive power like Trump has to make the immigration system so abusive.
One thing I just wanted to add, we have a letter writing ladder here in Denver. And if there's a negative article in the paper, sometimes, they only print like 3 letters now. Our paper is like this big. But if you respond online, if you get a group of people to respond online to the online newspaper, because it devolves into hate, you've seen the comments, and you just have flood it with positive information. I think that's really effective.
That's amazing. Thank you. And just to also piggyback on what Alyssa said, I think one thing that the Trump administration made very clear for us, I think, is like how vulnerable some of these executive actions can be. Like, for example, DACA, right? And that's where I'm thinking that, yeah, the executive and the administration could and should, and really they have at this point a duty to protect dreamers and to protect DACA and to expand DACA. But like Alyssa said, that's ripe for legislation. That's ripe for real congressional action to provide a permanent protection for these for immigrant youth and for DACA holders and for dreamers. So some of the things I'm trying to check my own expectations about the new administration and think about really like what would be the most permanent type of protection. And a lot of that lies really with Congress. Any other questions or comments that we can answer?
Thank you so much for being here, both of you. And we've recorded this and it's going to be shared within our community. We have a Google group listserv for folks that can't make it at 9 o'clock on a Friday morning. So we were going to share the video and the information. And thank you so much. We'll probably be talking in the future.
Thank you. I really hope so. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us today and for taking the time to listen. We really appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate all the work that you are doing, and we will spread it for sure. Okay, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Okay.